Welcome everyone. Today we are talking about assessment for learning again, but with a specific and key focus on low-tech solutions. Unfortunately, we know that not all our schools are equipped with a great comprehensive technology, learner devices, the one-to-one devices, etc. Those things, these are wonderful dreams that we have, but we have to be realistic about what our context is. So for me, it was important to go and explore a couple of low-tech solutions you could also find, ways that you can still use digital assessment, but if you might not be geared with everything. Some of the things we're going to look at today, you don't even need ESCOM to be up and running for us, for you to use some of these assessment techniques. But before we get to that, I think it's critical. Some of you might have not been in that session last week, or might not, or might just want a refresher on this thing again. And that is, for me, this is one of the most important things for us to understand. What is the feedback loop? In totality we have. And it's something that I talk about often in order to understand what this whole process is. So the feedback loop starts over here, and this is what we call, in other words, teaching. This is when we build content knowledge. First and foremost, we talk to our learners, we discuss certain things with them, and we try to construct new knowledge. Then, in order for us to be able to know whether or not they've actually learned it, we assess the content knowledge. Now, this is done in many different ways. We all know formal assessments when learners have to write tests, and we know about projects and all sorts of things to assess the knowledge that they have. We do this in smaller ways as well. We ask kids questions in class. Raise your hand. Do you have, does anyone know the answer? We ask them to do homework. There's lots of ways that we assess. But effectively, what assessment really means is we check whether or not the content knowledge was built successfully. Then a critical step is once we've assessed that, we need to give them feedback. Do they know, or what did they get wrong? What don't they understand? This can be done either as a teacher giving feedback or a learner getting feedback on his own. But here's the crux. And then obviously the idea is this feedback we should be using to identify missing knowledge. What is missing? What part of the knowledge have we not covered yet? And then lastly, once we know what we have not covered yet, we go and build that knowledge again. And in this way, you'll see what we're effectively trying to do is we're trying to create a cycle of learning. So we build knowledge, we test whether or not the knowledge has been achieved, we give feedback on that, either to the learner, either from a teacher's perspective or from a kind of doing your self-feedback, and then we identify missing knowledge. Now, the problem is what's happening very often is we actually have a feedback loop that is broken, and it's missing this top part. So there's nothing happening here. We build content knowledge, then we assess whether or not the content knowledge has been learned, and then we give them feedback. But there's a big problem with the feedback we give them, and that it simply comes down to time. When do we give them feedback? How long does it take for them to get feedback? How long does it take us to be able to give them feedback? Because I remember very well, that's one of the biggest things. I was an English home language teacher for grade 10 to 12 learners. Feedback is a nightmare because it takes forever to mark those essays, to mark those tests. All of it takes so very long. And the problem is because we're not using our assessment for learning, the kind of feedback we're trying to give learners is often only based on summative assessment. And the nature of how things are structured in terms of our curriculum is by the time we do summative assessment, there's already some element of pressure on us to go on to the next thing. We need to move on and we need to get to the next part of the work that needs to be taught. But the problem is because we haven't actually gone and identified the missing knowledge, what we're doing is we're building new knowledge on a faulty on faulty foundations. if we spend a bit more time trying to re-establish this feedback loop, if we spend a bit more time trying to make sure that we can get this part of the feedback loop happening more effectively, the feedback and the identifying missing knowledge, then surely we're going to have greater success in our summative assessment. But the problem is doing this takes time. So the critical thing is what we want to do is assessment for learning. As you can see, it closes the feedback loop. Critical thing, it actually closes it. And how does this assessment for learning idea try to close? It tries to give us instant feedback. Because we cannot build the feedback loop on summative assessment. The nature of summative assessment or formal assessment, depending on what you want to call it, the nature of that is so that it takes longer to mark. We're not necessarily at the point where we will be doing formal assessment with digital tools, even though to a certain extent it can be done, but the system is not quite used to that yet. So we need to try and really leverage this idea of instant feedback. And it would be great if we all had tablets in our classrooms, or if all our learners had mobile devices and they were all connected to the internet and the internet was always stable. Then we could do a lot of these things in different ways than what I'm going to show you today, and ways that are arguably even more effective, even quicker. But we have to be realistic. That's not the scenario that we are in. We are in a scenario where we do not always have that kind of technology. We want to do this kind of thing, but how and where do we go from now? So we want to look at how can we make this feedback instant? What do we do to do this? What are the processes that we can put into place to try and make this feedback as instant as possible, both for your sake and for the learner's sake? Because remember, from a teacher's perspective, instant feedback helps you to understand whether or not the learning outcomes have actually been met. So you can quickly determine, I've just taught these kids, to take an example from my own, I've just taught these kids this poem. Let me test whether or not they know it, and then we will go on or not go on, depending on what my test reveals to me. So one way to do that is lots of little class tests, but then marks all those class tests. You can get the kids to mark it themselves. That's an option, of course. But then, I mean, there are always kind of little things involved with that. And then the setting of the tests itself. Who sets those tests? Where do you get all this anyway? There's a lot of elements to that. So we want to make feedback instant. We want to do more formal assessment or informative assessment, but at the same time, we have to be mindful of a pressurized curriculum. We have to be mindful of the fact that there's always the next thing that needs to happen. This is the context within which teachers operate, and we know this and we understand this. So for me, I wanted to find a quick and easy way for us to be able to achieve this. And very importantly, how do we do it without learner devices? Because if we're going to be realistic, the majority of our schools are in that position. Now, I know the session that Craig will have with you on Quizlet, for example, he will tell you, and he's 100% correct, you don't need a fancy tablet. You can do all of these things on a smartphone if learners have those. And there's lots of different ways that try and maybe run a project where you get all the smartphones in, you clear them and you use them as devices in the classroom. But what do we do if we have no learner devices or the internet is out, for example? How do we get around these things? Or in the case of the one tool I'm going to show you, Eskom unfortunately has shut down the power. How do we deal with these things? So there are we are talking about digital assessment. So there has to be some element of device involved. We can't do it with no devices. So what are the devices that we're going to need? Right. So what you will need, there are two different tools that we will be looking at. The first tool, you will have to have, for both tools, you'll need to have a smartphone and you'll need to have a teacher laptop or desktop, one of the two. You'll need to have those things. You could theoretically get away with a one tool by only having a smartphone. I would not recommend it though. So now SwiftGrade is going to do the same thing. It's kind of the same type of principle. We're going to take the concept of the bubble quiz and we're just going to really supercharge it with all sorts of really great new features. What I'm going to show you with SwiftGrade, like with quizzes, is only the tip of the iceberg. So you need to go and explore what else we can do with it. So what SwiftGrade effectively does is SwiftGrade allows me to create answer sheets that look like this, right? So if you have a look at these answer sheets, there I've got multiple answer sheets. So let me just put two of them next to each other so you can see, okay, there's a whole bunch of them together. But effectively what these answer sheets look like is you'll see these answer sheets have two types of things to them. They have over here, they've got the multiple choice part. And what I'm doing now is not a good idea because you shouldn't really be doing that on these. And then over here in the green, they've got blocks where you actually fill in answers. Now, in this case, I've only used numbers, but you can do this with text as well, or not text, with words. You do not need to use it. You do not actually have to use only numbers. It is designed to read words as well. So how does it work? I'm going to show you how I mark this test. So let me just quickly open up the app on my phone. Right, so I'm going to open up the app and I'm going to go to the assessment. So over here, if you can see on my phone, I've got my assessment and I'm going to select the scan mode. Right, so now we're going to start scanning these and I'm going to turn them over as quickly as they are scanned. Can you get the idea of what I'm talking about? This is me marking a 10-mark test by simply flipping over a page. Right, I've already marked 12 learners. So there we go to 13. There we go to 14. Just to give you the idea of how quick and easy it is to mark things with this. Right, so I'm not going to actually go and submit these scans because I did this earlier. So this class has already been marked. But effectively what SwiftGrade does, as I said, is it creates a mark sheet. A mark sheet that allows you to have bubble questions, allows you to have written questions. In this case, I only use numbers, but it really goes and it allows you to go to that kind of extreme of marking. And I think everyone will agree that marked pretty quickly. It did not take me very long to mark those things. So
I really didn't believe you that it was so fast, and it's insanely fast.
Right. So now the question is, it can't only be fast, it needs to actually work as well. So I want to show you this and what actually happens now with that. So it's been marked. So we'll first look at how the tool works, and then I'll show you how we set it up. So over here, you'll see I've got assessment 3, 22 results, 22 learners that actually completed this. But then importantly, once I've actually scanned these things, it cannot capture every single thing 100% accurately when it does that. So you'll see here, it tells me that it needs grading, which kind of defeats the purpose. I thought this thing is an automatic grader. Why am I now still involved in grading this thing? So let me show you the process that needs to happen next. So once you've scanned it, I'm going to click on that needs grading, and it opens up the actual results of this of the scan that I did. Now, when it opens it up, it gives me quite impressively, I did not actually input this as a class beforehand. But these kids had to write their names down. So there we go. There are the names of the people that actually scanned all these things, right? It might not have picked all of it up 100% accurately, but I'm going to show you how you can create classes as well to make sure it's even more accurate. JC, the learner's handwriting obviously will have an impact. The clearer they can write, the more likely it's going to pick it up correctly. However, like with all of these artificial intelligence things, it gets better, and it is getting better. Now, I'm going to show you where that part comes in, the handwriting thing that you spoke about. So when I click on this button over here, it then expands all the answers for all the learners. So let me click on that, expand all. And what it does now is it shows me what it actually marked. And it shows me everything that was captured. So you can see over here, it captured the A, it captured the B, it captured the B, but the B is wrong. So in each of these, I can now check whether or not it captured it correctly. What I can tell you, when it comes to the bubbles, it is very, 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 very accurate. It really, really is accurate. It struggles a little bit more when it comes to trying to pick these things up. But have a look at this example. So the answer was supposed to be x plus 2 to the power of 2, right? X plus 2 squared. This learner wrote x minus 3, x minus 3. But then you can see as well, have a look at that. That is what he wrote. So that's accurate. Now, you can go and you can scroll through all of these things and check it, but that doesn't really help you in terms of, excuse me, speeding up your process. So we want to find ways that this can speed up our process. And this is where the filter becomes a critical part. So if I click on filters, it shows me that I can now filter out different types of questions. Excuse me. So over here, you've got the low confidence part, which is the critical thing that you need to look at. Low confidence means that is the part where it scanned and wasn't able to scan it with any certainty. So whenever you scan it the first time, the best idea is open up the filter, unselect all of these things, show only the low confidence. So now it's going to show me only the parts that it struggled to capture. And you will pick up a pattern here. If you look at the kinds of things that it didn't scan correctly, I mean, I think we can forgive it. Look at this, whatever the learner wrote there. I can understand why it struggled to scan that correctly. Because, I mean, that just does not look like that. If we scroll down and we look at the next one, kind of the same thing. The answer is supposed to be 3. They actually wrote down 3, scratched it out, and then wrote A equals 7. Right, so over here you can see that, like, it really gets it confused by that's the answer that it picked up, because it saw that 3 like scratches there and then tried to figure out what's going on, and it didn't quite get it right. The thing is, what you can do always with this thing, and this is why the check is there, I can then go and I can say, but they actually got it right. Because I then read and I check this and I say, no, they actually got it right. So now I'm happy with that answer. I scroll down. Here, an interesting thing that I picked up. This is simply me trying to go too quick. You saw me flipping over the pages. This was just, I wanted to really brag with this thing and rushed it. So it kind of struggled, but to get this right. But I think it's pretty impressive that it even got that scanned it correctly, because that is what the learner wrote, A equals 5, which is not the right answer. And then I scroll down and I'll pick up some other ones over here. Here's a classic example of the handwriting thing that you spoke about, that JC mentioned. This kid has a pretty, lots of scratches and lots of things that confused it. So it's a good idea. What I told the learners when they were doing it, because a number of them said, how do we do calculations? What do we do if we want to do calculations? So you can obviously give them a piece of paper that they do calculations on. What I also pointed out is, remember, it is only going to scan this area. It only wants to scan that. It needs to make sure that these corners here in the top can be scanned, and then at the bottom, just to show you that as well, there's a barcode and there are things there that need to be scanned. Those are the parts that need to be unobstructed. So if you have to, you've actually got a little bit of white space over here where you can scribble and write stuff down, should you need to do that, if that is a requirement for you in whatever the thing is that you're going to be doing. However, if we think about it, I marked, and this again, it got this very, very badly confused. Other than that, if you look at it, this is another thing that I think is really cool. It actually auto-corrected it, because this learner wrote A equals 21, and the answer is supposed to be 21, and it just kind of figured that out on its own, that it shouldn't take that as wrong. It should just auto-correct it to that, which means it's got things built in that allows you to not worry about capitalization and things like that. It'll kind of figure it out on its own. And then again, if we scroll down, all in all, if you think about it, I'm talking about 22 learners that answered 10 questions each, and it was scanned. And if you look at how many questions it actually struggled with, I think it's pretty remarkable how accurate it was able to scan this. These are the only things I need to check, and I've got a 10 mark question for 22 learners with written answers, not just bubble answers, scanned and done and dusted. Really, really useful. And then again, part of that formative assessment, the assessment for learning, is knowing where things went wrong. So I can go on answers, and then I go through the questions one by one. It's taking a little bit longer to load now. Right, so yeah, I can go through the questions one by one. Obviously I've got all my filters applied now again. So now I'll just open up everything again. I'd reset. Yeah, it's just taking it. We'll get back to that in a second. But I think this to me is the critical part. When we get to the averages, it shows me the kind of marks that they're getting. Sorry, that is the answers part that I wanted to check specifically. Right, so here it shows me all the answers, and I kind of get a breakdown. And then if I go to analysis, which is the last part of this thing, it tells me the same as what we had with the other one. It starts giving me a breakdown of the questions that were right, the questions that were wrong, etc., etc. Right, so over here, I've got 10 questions. Oh, I've got the 10 questions. It has flagged these for me. Right, you'll see these have been flagged as questions where the majority of the learners got it wrong. Only 3 learners got this one right, and only 2 learners got this one right. So now I know this is something I need to pay attention to. I should go and reteach it, focus in on what needs to be done. Yes, the results can be printed out. I just need to double check where that button is. I found it earlier. But yes, there we go. There's the download results. So over here, you have the option to download the results, and it'll give you a printout of whatever it is that you scanned. And of course, you can have your original copies with you as well. Okay. So same as what we did with quizzes, let's have a look at how you actually set this thing up now. So how do we go about setting this whole thing up? When you log into SwiftGrade the first time, you will see something that looks like this. It's very straightforward. It's very clean. It's very simple. I created one class. I called it test class, and I tested this with a couple of my colleagues. I used the same test class for the test that I ran today with the students as well. But the idea is, and this is how it works, it wants you to create a class for ideally, JC, black pen block letters, a lot more accurate, right? So also what I want to show you very quickly when it comes to just the multiple choice thing. So there you've got a little button that just allows you to quickly generate a multiple choice grid, and you can decide how many you want. But I think one of the cool things about it is immediately it shows you can potentially have 100 multiple choice questions that you ask for learners, and that is one page, and it'll kind of scan it at the same speed as what I showed you just now. Yasmina, I haven't really tried the pencil extensively. I know one of the learners when they were answering this was using pencil and it did work. It depends on how well they can do it. If it's dark enough, um, I think if it's dark enough, it shouldn't be a problem. I haven't tested it extensively to know whether or not pencil. I know they recommend using pen, black pen, as it is the darkest way of coloring it in. And the other thing that's important is kids sometimes want to make crosses and not actually color it in. So you'll have to explain that to them, but I'm pretty sure a dark enough pencil will work. I get why you're asking about pencil, because if they want to change their answer, how do they change their answer? Um, but generally, when it comes to scanning and recognizing handwriting, etc., it does struggle a bit more with pencil, from personal experience. And I can't say with certainty when it comes to SwiftGrade. I just know that they do recommend pen. So I think this is something that's kind of important to remember: 100 multiple choice questions on one sheet. Not that we always do things in multiple choice, but I mean, you can test pretty much anything in multiple choice. Not everything, but a lot of things can be tested. So what do? I want to create a class. We want to create a new class. I am going to call it my new class, whatever you want to call it. It's as simple as that. And we say create. In my new class, I now have the option to create my first answer key. But before I want to create my answer key, I want to add students to this as well. So over there is the students option. I click on students. And then when I add students, there are two ways to add students, right? You can go, and if your kids are a little bit more tech savvy and they understand how these things work and they've done things like this before, you can generate a code and you can send the code to the kids and they can effectively enroll themselves into your classroom, which is something I always enjoy doing because the learners in my class had gotten used to this process. But if your learners aren't used to that process, we can take this option of adding them manually. And this is really, really, really quick and easy to do. So I can basically, I think I've got some names here. I'm just going to check in my over here. So these are just some dummy names that I prepared beforehand. You'll see this looks like a spreadsheet. So you can actually go and generate all of this in a spreadsheet. I'm going to go and say paste over here. So we'll just paste these names and come on, no, I didn't copy it correctly. Let me just do that again. Now I am trying to copy from the wrong place. Anyway, so just give me a second and I just open up a list of random generated names. The key thing with this that I think is important to understand is, like with all of these things, it has two sides to it. It has the teacher side to it and the learner side to it. So you'll see it has this option for them to create an account where they will have a password and a username. So they can also check the results of the quizzes that they've completed. You can assign quizzes to them at certain times. And what's great about SwiftGrade, like with quizzes that we looked at, it has both this offline low-tech kind of me scanning with myself and as a teacher option. But if you have access to better technology, it also has the option to do an online quiz type of thing where you ask them questions and they respond to that and they get instant feedback, etc., etc. So you have that option, which is very useful to have the two. So, right, if I just copy this list of names and surnames from a sheet, it just goes in, automatically generates as part of that things. I'm going to say I want to automatically generate passwords and usernames, and we're just going to say add students. Right, so there are the usernames and the passwords. So if these kids are not necessarily going to log in, you can just do it like that. These are kind of impossible usernames and passwords to remember. So once you have it, it's important to kind of make sure that you save these somewhere. Again, you can select all of this. It looks like a spreadsheet because, it acts exactly like one. and you can paste it into a spreadsheet. So I'm just on my other screen, just to show you here, I literally just copied and pasted it so that I can keep a record of this for a later stage. Quick and easy, I've created my classroom and now I've added my students. Now, the reason why I want to be able to do that is I just want to show you here again on the camera as it's adding the students. Right, so here it tells me, please download student passwords as you cannot see them again after you have set them up, but you can reset them if someone forgets them. But over here on my camera again, I want to show you that my highlight has gone missing. Right, let me just show you the pencil. Over here, you'll see it doesn't actually have that top bit where it asks for the name and the surname and the email and all those things. It actually has the person's name. My e-learning colleague, Evan Papier, his name is listed over here. What that means is this specific sheet that I've created is specific to him. It will automatically pick up it is his response, and it will save his response next to his name, which is the useful part of creating a class first. Right, so now I've got my class, I've got them set, there's all of them ready to go. Now, how do I actually create this quiz that I now want to create? Right, we're going to go to assessments and I click on create. Now, this is the part that can be kind of confusing if the first time that you're using it, because there are no spaces to enter the questions. This is only input the answers to your assessment. I think that is the critical thing to understand. You have to input only the answers to whatever it is that you've set up. The cool thing about this for me is any test or quiz or thing that you've set up in the past is automatically can be marked with this tool. You can take anything that you've set up in the past and immediately just use it for this. So what you'll typically do, and I'm just going to open up a little test that I create or system questions that I was able to grab earlier. So I've got a random quiz on the left, and then I've got my answer sheet on the right. And what I'll typically do is I'm going to give this quiz to the learners so that they've got the question paper on the one end. And instead of answering it on a normal folio page, I will now generate an answer sheet that they're going to use so that I can scan the answer sheet and get my answers my answers from that. Now, here are my questions. I've set up 10 questions. Here's my memo at the bottom. So I'm going to make it easy for myself. When I set up a question, I now look at the top. I have 6 multiple choice questions. So I'll choose the option multiple choice. And I'm just going to say, I want 6 multiple choice questions. There are my 6 multiple choice questions. Good to go. Let's see what we have over here. It's B and then D and then A and C and A. I missed one. C and C, C and A. So there I've got my multiple choice questions. Then I'm going to go to my fill in the blank. And I have multiple choice ones. Sorry, I'm going to create 4 of those. So here are my 4 different questions. Right, this is the fill in the blank. So what are my answers? That's my first answer. Copy, copy, paste, copy and paste, copy and paste. So here where you see the AC is where I can say autocorrect student spelling errors. So for maths questions, I would recommend you turn this off because it might try too hard to let them get it right. But for fill in the blank answers, it adds that autocorrecting. If you're doing a spelling test, because this is a cool example of what you could be doing with this, you could set up a spelling test, have 20 words, and as a teacher, you stand in front of the class and you read out the words, and they have to write it down. Then you obviously turn off this little thing, right? Got it? I'm going to turn it off. I want to turn this one off. Right? And it's going to, looks like it wants to tell me every single time, are you sure you want to turn it off? Right? Or I can then just turn it on again. So you can choose whether or not you want to use it or not want to use it, depending on what it is that you are using. Right? Now I've got my thing done. I'm going to say create. Here's the part where I said you can either do the online or the offline. We are only looking at the offline solution today, so I'm not going to go to the online, but I really encourage that if you are in a situation where you could potentially use that. So you click paper. Right, now once we've clicked paper, okay, so we are done with our little quiz. We don't need to see that anymore. Right, so there's assessment 1. Good to go. Now it tells me the next step, and I think this is quite a nifty little thing that it does. Over here it says next step. My next step is now to print out the answer sheet. Now remember, I have a class of 57 students. So what it will do when I say print the answer sheet is it will actually go and generate this answer sheet like that. So there it shows me an example. Hutchinson Isle over there. This is the one that it gives me. But now what I can also do, I can have extra no-name sheets. So let's say I have 5 extra no-name sheets, just kind of in case there's a new kid on that day who is not part of my list and he actually needs to be added. And we click download. Right. Now what it has to do, and this is why it takes a little bit longer to do that, it generates unique answer sheets for every single learner so that it is able to then go and scan that later on. Well, it told me it's going to take longer than that. It did not take longer, 2 minutes even. It is downloading that answer sheet. So that as soon as it's done, I'm going to pull it up and I'll show you what it looks like. And there is the answer sheet, 62 pages. So you'll see every learner gets their own one. When you're handing it out, you make sure they all get the right one. Obviously, just tell them to check the name. Did they get the right one? Now they don't need to write their names or anything. And right at the bottom, you'll see I have a few blank ones where I have not added the name yet. So I could potentially add that as well. So here I've got a 10-mark quiz good to go for physical science, maths, or whatever I want to use it, languages. You could actually use it for absolutely anything that you need to. And just to kind of reinforce that idea, once that is done and I hand it out to my learners, I obviously have to give them the questions as well. Whether you show the questions on the board, whether you print out the questions to them, if it's a longer thing, that's entirely up to you. But it all comes back to this very, 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 very simple way of actually answering these questions. And I just want to reinforce that whole thing just to show you that again, because I think it really does kind of, if you kind of get this part, that it is so quick and easy to scan these things. So now I'm in the wrong class. And we want to scan this. Right, so now I'm back to scanning, if you can see there. Right, I'm back to scanning. Let's go. And right, there we go. We start scanning these. And done. And done. And done. Right. So that is how quick it is to actually scan these examples that I'm showing you. Right. So the critical thing is, again, as I said, you don't even need power if you're going to implement this thing. That is how low tech it potentially can be. All that you need is from your end, you need to have the time to set this up. And I hope I've shown you it doesn't actually take that long to set it up. The same with the quizzes one. It doesn't take that long to set up. These are quick and easy things that you can put together and can get going on your end really, really, really easily. And it gives you that kind of information that you really, or it gives you the ability to understand and the ability to check whether or not your learners truly understand what is going on or not. Right. Are there any questions on this tool? Anything that you would like to ask about? I know one of the questions someone asked is if I want to use this For multiple classes, how can I go about doing that? What I would suggest that you actually create individual classes for each one, because once you've set up an answer key in one class, you can easily go and say, right, I want to actually go and copy this one. So let me take assessment 1 and make a copy of it, and I move it into awesome new class, right? I don't want to call it assessment 1 copy. I'm going to call it maths quiz, and I say copy. And I can scan these and I can use it. You'll see again what my next step is. Over here, it'll tell me my next step is to print. The other one is to take a photo. But whenever you need to kind of make sure that you actually still want to print it again, you simply click and select the quiz. Sometimes that's a little bit confusing. If I click on that option, you'll see that the print, copy, rename, edit option pop up again. Right. In order to set up, yes, this is an internet-based tool, Masibulele. So you have to be able, you must be on the internet in order to set this part up. And when you are scanning it, your mobile device has to have an internet connection when you are scanning it. When they're writing it, you obviously don't need anything because it's a piece of paper. So then they can go and do it. If you are setting up your test, remember that's the critical part you have to understand about the difference between in SwiftGrade is the test itself, that you set up any way that you want to. And you also give it to the learners any way that you want to. You can read the questions out to them, and then they have to write the answers in the blocks. The language paper is an interesting question, so that you're asking. Let's create again, this is just a quiz, so we would typically have to have language questions set up. Let me try and generate a few language questions for us. I'm just going to be lazy and run into ChatGPT and ask it to generate some questions for us. Right, set up a 10-point multiple choice on language grade 10. Right, not a very well-phrased question, but it should work. So there's my question. Those of you who haven't not used this before, now you get a little bit of a sneak peek into how cool AI could potentially be for you. So what is the definition of a metaphor? Which of the following is an example of a simile? In literature, what is foreshadowing? What is the purpose of a thesis statement in an essay? Now, the thing is, what you could potentially do, these questions that are one-word answers, what literary device is used when a character says something but means the opposite? So I could ask this as a question and then have them. I hope you can see clearly on your end. Let me just zoom in a little bit. Right. So what literary device is used when a character says something but means the opposite? You could say fill in the blank, and you could have them answer that. I would not recommend using this tool for sentences yet. And I think that's a critical thing to say. This tool is in beta. They are working on the ability to analyze paragraphs and mark paragraphs that they've scanned as well. This is where the artificial intelligence element is going to come in. But when it comes to one-word answers, or when it comes to multiple choice, then yes, you can use this as a language paper as well. Myself, having been a language teacher, I know we have very few one-word answers and very few multiple choice questions in our formal assessments, but you have to understand this is an informal assessment. If I'm doing a poem, there's no reason why I can't say generate 10 multiple choice questions on shall I compare the to a, I'm just going to see if it's clever enough. Right, so yes, it figured out, shall I compare thee to the summer's day? There's 10 multiple choice questions on shall I compare thee to a summer's day? So perfect example of how you could potentially take this, generate 10 multiple choice questions for your learners. You literally copy and paste this, and then you get the answers. Now it's giving me the answers as well if I'm uncertain. So I've got my answers. I tell this thing multiple choice. I'm going to generate 10 lines just to show you how quick this is. B, B, C, A, C, C, D, B, A, and C. Now, of course, you should first check everything that's been generated by AI. I haven't checked anything that ChatGPT has generated for me now, so you shouldn't be doing exactly as I'm doing this, but it should be reasonably accurate. And there you've got your whole thing set up. I'm going to call this, shall I compare thee to a summer's day quiz? And it's done. My answer sheet is finished. And I've actually generated my questions over here. So I could copy this and I could print this out and hand this to the learners as one page, and then have this given to the learners as a second page that I print out and send to them. Yes, I hope that answers your question. I think these are incredibly useful tools that can make an enormous difference in our schools. And I really want us to consider, if there's one thing that you do take away from this entire session, it's this idea of assessment for learning can close that feedback loop. Whether we do it as a digital assessment for learning, or whether we're doing it as this kind of mode of learning, or whether we're even doing it in a more traditional way. Assessment for learning is critical, and the part that the digital tools, really the superpower of digital tools, integrating digital tools, for me, is the instant feedback that it can actually give you. This ability to have instant feedback and be able to act on that feedback, to be able to identify where you can work on, what you still need to do. And then instead of us just teaching, testing, and moving on, we can teach, we can test, we can feedback, we can adjust, and we can reteach, and we can fill the blanks that we missed out on the first time. So I think one of the things that I like most about both quizzes and SwiftGrade is that the simplicity of the tools. They're not overcomplicated, but what I've only shown you, and this is important, we have only actually scraped the surface of these tools.